Hello, everybody. I wanted to come to you tonight and talk about the shadow work. And this is something that's very interesting. I'm working on a program that I'm going to be revealing soon on meeting your shadow and turning that shadow into strength, Shadow2Strength. Because what I've learned in my life on the journey of avoiding the parts of myself that I didn't want to look at, the parts of myself that I felt were horrible and nobody would love, those are the parts of ourselves that often make up our shadow. And so what we tend to do is we tend to project that shadow onto the world, and then we can persecute the shadow so we can justify our own life. So I want to just dive in for a few minutes. I'm going to give you like a little a preview, a trailer, if you will, of the work, and just kind of start to let you know what the process will be, because I think this will be very healing to a lot of you out there who have not dived into this. And if you followed me at all, or if you're new, I've worked on parts of myself for a long time, starting off with, self-help, like we all take that journey into the self-help books. And then after a lot of years with self-help, I realized a lot of times in self-help, they say you're broken, you need to be fixed. And there's always this thing where you're fixing yourself. And that's okay. But then as I wanted to go deeper into my internal dimensions, I got into yoga and meditation and plant medicines. And so coming up against that part of ourselves that we're afraid to face is really what the shadow consists of. You see, so many people desire to be positive all the time. In fact, I realize sometimes being positive all the time can be very toxic, because when you're positive all the time, you're denying the other half of reality, which is in duality, the negative or the dark side. And until we bring that part home, until we come home with that part of ourselves that we do not like, we're not going to have the completeness and the wholeness and the true joy and happiness and peace that we're really searching for in the external world. And so I wanted to just dive in with this and share. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring up my notepad and I want to share this with you. So we're going to be talking about the shadow. And if you do come on, feel free to say hello to me. I would love to see that you're coming on, and I'll shout out to you when you do that. If it is a replay, just type replay, hashtag replay. That way I know. And you can do hashtag shadow2 strength. Shadow2 strength. Looks like this. Shadow2 strength. Hashtag that. All right. So here's the concept. And Carl Jung talks about this in his books, that there's kind of like four elements to who we are. There's the persona. And the persona is the mask that we wear. And we don't have just one mask. We have probably thousands of masks. And the way I look at this is, if we take consciousness itself, or the infinite, and we take the infinite and put it through a reduction valve into the finite world, the finite realm, and then we have this little baby being born, which is an encapsulated particle of the absolute, right? And now what we have is a being, and then they're going to be programmed what's good and what's bad, because we're born into a world of duality. And along the way, the child will start to grow and hear things and see things and feel things and realize, hi, James, Happy New Year to you, brother. Glad to see you. So the child will be basically looking to the parents and to society to determine, based on the new thinking, what is it that's okay and what's not okay. So the programming begins, because when the child's born, they are not thinking. The child has no boundaries. It's basically believes there's just one, until the programming begins. This is mom and dad, and that's you, baby, and there's a separation. And then, of course, children here know thousands, probably millions of times, and they understand what is not okay and what is okay. And that goes into the programmed mind from 0 to 7 years old when the baby's in theta wave. So the persona is we start to put these masks on ourselves because the brain is always searching for meaning. And because the brain is dual, even when the child doesn't understand that mom or dad, it doesn't mean what the child thinks it means, they place meaning on it. So for example, if you're, I'm just going to use my past with sexuality. When I was a little boy, I knew I was attracted to other boys at 4 years old. And when I went to kiss my friend John, my mom knocked on the window and started shaking her hand, and she had a lot of anger and frustration. So as a little boy, I placed meaning on that's not okay. I can't love my friend John. And so I took that circumstance that was outside of me, that was by the only person that I really knew at that time in my life, my mom, who I looked up to as my provider, and I realized that was not okay. There was a feeling. It wasn't anything more than a feeling I got from her energetic response that this is not okay. So now what I've done in that persona is I break a little piece, right? I break a little piece. And I start to put a mask on of who I am. So that's first, persona. Okay, the other one, I wanted to make sure I write this down here. The other part was I want to make sure I got it right. Excuse my reach here. I just did the research and I wanted to make sure I don't miss it. Yeah. Anima, small, okay. It's the anima. Okay, the anima. And the anima is what Jung classifies as the inner child. Okay. So the anima, so this is the mask here, right? We have our mask. And we have 1,000 masks. Then we have the inner child. So that little tiny child within us is who's really driving the bus. So a lot of our challenges in our life are because this little child actually was making all the decisions with a mind or with their brain when they were children without really understanding the meaning. So the brain always looks for meaning, so they placed meaning on it. When my mom did that, I felt like she was not really loving me, right? I felt like I was disregarded and she was angry at me for me feeling love and whatever I felt towards my friend. And when my dad left me at 4 years old, when my dad left, I felt rejected and abandoned, that my dad didn't love me. So what happens is these children start to create the meaning with the brain and with the masks, and all this happens as child is growing, right? So then the next thing that we have is the self. And the self is, in this case, I would say it's the small self. The small self would be not who you really are, it's who you think you are. And this might be closer to source energy, the self. Who is the self? And I might even put with this the ego, myself. Because a lot of times when we ask somebody who they are, they're going to give you all these different masks, but it's kind of like, who is behind the mask? It's the self. I call it also the I am. The I am, which is pure and simple being, presence. Okay, so we have the persona, we have the anima, and we have the small self. The fourth one, by the way, is the shadow. And the shadow is the one we're talking about tonight. The shadow, we all have this shadow. However, most of us have never dealt with our shadow self. And the reason the world is where it is today, I believe the world is where it is today because so many people have not dealt with their shadow. And so the shadow is falling upon the earth because the ego has gotten out of control. The fragmented parts of ourself have gotten out of control. So let me just come back to you here and say that the shadow is, if we can put it this way, is a fragmented part of our wholeness. So when a child's born, I believe the child is born with pure joy, happiness. That is the true nature of who we are. We are happy, beautiful, infinite beings that are placed in this physical three-dimensional space called planet Earth. And then the programming begins, and the mind, which is noise of duality, good and bad, up and down, wrong and right, that starts to shade over the happiness because then we start to identify. As a child, we start to identify ourselves with whatever the program is that was installed in us by society, by our parents, by our teachers, by our friends, by our church. And so the belief is they don't know who they are, but they identify with this physical meat suit or these thoughts that go through their heads. And when the bad thoughts come, and they're not really bad, but they've been labeled as bad because the child has fragmented a part of itself. So for example, if we go back to the example I used when I was a kid and I wanted to kiss my friend John under the picnic table at 4 years old, and my mom's knocking on the window. Well, as a little boy, that little inner child, who was not an inner child at the time, it was a real child, I fragmented because I said, I have a feeling towards this friend of mine whom I love, and I loved being with him. I wanted to kiss him and whatever. But my mom said, no, that's bad. I could feel the energetic feeling from it. And what I did is I did what we all do, which is called a dis. So a dis means we created two out of one. So the two out of one. So I was whole, and now I have two parts of me. The good, which was the part of me that I loved John and I wanted to connect with him. The bad is my mom says this is bad. It's a bad part of myself. So I separated myself into two, and now I have a dis. And this is the beginning of dis-ease. Let me say that again. The shadow, the breaking off of our wholeness into fragmentation, is the beginning of our dis-ease, dissatisfaction, disharmony. We have broken ourselves into this. Now what happens is this negative moves to the shadow, right? And we say, it's not okay to be who I am. And you could call it whatever. You could call it gay. Now, I knew back then, I didn't know what gay was. But I knew whatever I was not liked. And I had these feelings. And now I had to hide them. Because that's who I was. I'm a little boy. I don't know what else to do. I just knew that if I showed that negative to my parents, my mom, I'm going to get anger, energy, feel unloved and separated. And as a child, we want more than anything survival and not to be abandoned. So I pushed them down. They were going on inside of me, feelings, thoughts, all this as I started to grow up. All these then are fragmented off and become the shadow. So this is the process we go through, right? These four elements of who we are, and usually we start to believe we're these masks. We don't really spend a lot of time with the inner child. We think that we're adults, we have it handled, but the truth is that little 7-year-old is driving the bus in our life. The bus that they're driving is our life, and they are ahead of us. They were there before us. I'm 55 years old, but I am not the one driving. It's my 7-year-old, my 5-year-old, my 4-year-old, who were there before this 55-year-old man was there, and they created the brain. They created the neural highways, the experiences, the imprints, and those are what steers my life. And until I come back home to love that little boy and to make peace with this shadow, I'm going to have challenges, right? I'm going to have challenges throughout my life. This is what the world needs right now. This is where we're going to have peace and healing on this planet when we start to look at the fragments of ourself that we broke off. So what happened for me, and I'm using this as the sexual aspect because it relates to a lot of people. I could use hate, anger, violence, money, anything. I could use them all because I had probably all of those. But I think this one's very clear. And what happens now is this shadow haunts me. I don't want anybody to see who I am. And I hate that part of myself because it creates separation. So it creates separation. And when it creates separation, what happens is I feel alone. And even though I might be amidst people, inside myself, I feel very alone. Because my thought now is if they really knew me, they would hate me, like my mom. If they really knew me, they would abandon me, like my dad. Because I had feelings for my friend John, and that's not okay. Or because I was angry, or because whatever. You can throw 1,000 things in. And when I do this Shadow2Strength program that I'm going to invite all of you to, we're going to get deeper into that. Because once we start to heal the shadow within ourselves, the entire world will shift. We don't heal the world, we heal ourselves, and the world heals, because the world is a projection of our own internal self. So that hate starts to well up inside of us, and we don't let anybody see it. Then what we tend to do is we tend to project that part of ourselves that we don't like out into the world. And remember, consciousness is but a screen, like a movie theater. If you go to the movies, you see a screen. Nobody goes to the theater to watch the screen, right? It's just empty. It's just nothing. They go to the movie to watch what's going to be projected on the screen, and it's changing all the time. So what we do as children is we start to project onto the screen of consciousness, the outside world, we start to project what we hate about ourselves onto the other. So if I can project onto somebody else the things I don't like about me, then I can persecute them. I can see it clearly in somebody else because they're my mirror, but I didn't know that. They're my mirror, and I see on them that they like other boys. And I did this. I couldn't deal with it. So I would say things about people that liked the same sex. And so I was angry. I was angry because it brought up in me a lot of pain. When I saw that in them, I didn't like it because I did not like that part of myself that loved a same-sex friend named John when I was 4 years old. And I didn't like the fact that it brought up pain in my mom and separation between us. So when I saw it in others, I didn't like them. I persecuted them. Now, I never hurt anybody physically, but I probably hurt people with my words because it all has a karmic effect. Everything we think, say, or do is an action, and karma means action. So I created more pain in the world because I was hating myself, projecting it outward to the world, and that was my shadow. Just a piece of my shadow, but part of my shadow. I didn't know. And people don't know this. Kids don't know this. Who teaches their kids this, right? So that began the shadow. And there's a lot more. We could go in so many domains and discuss that. So let's go back, though, because now that we understand the shadow and how that's working in our lives. Oops, that's the wrong one. Let's go here. How that's working in our lives, we're going to talk about, let's talk about the negatives first. So what happens is we get this negative thought process, right? And it could be, I hate, ... whatever it is. I hate. Whatever we hate. In this case, when I was younger, I hated same-sex couples or homosexuality or whatever you want to call it, right? Whatever it is. I hated it because I had it in myself. And I was not okay with that. And it could be negative thoughts like, I'm not good enough. Because I felt that as a kid, not just with that aspect, but with the fact that I flunked kindergarten or that I wasn't doing well in school or whatever it is, right? So whatever these things are, we start to create these negative thought patterns about us and about the world around us. So as we look at the negative side of our lives, oftentimes even people today will say, I don't want to have negative thoughts, I only want positive thoughts. That in itself is a negative thought because the resistance against the negative is actually negative itself. So we live in this world where we get caught up in not knowing that what we're doing is creating more of the negative by resisting it. Resistance is an action trying to push against what we don't want, and that creates energy, and that energy is movement. Remember, movement is karma. Karma is action. And it's not just physical action, it's our thinking. When a thought comes up in my mind, and let's say we've thought this is a bad thought, from the time I was a kid, you shouldn't think about somebody that's sexually, let's say sexually, the same sex. Well, everybody does this. And let's be honest, everybody does this. However, a lot of us get very guilty when we do because it is taboo or we've been told it's bad. And therefore, what do? We try to repress it. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to repress. Now, these are repressed thoughts or thoughts that we have felt bad about earlier and we keep pushing it down. A good example would be this. If you had a house and there was dead bodies and you kept burying those dead bodies in your backyard, those are repressed. Maybe you forgot about them, right? There's a bunch of skeletons in your backyard. You're out there in the grass. You forget that they're there because time's gone on, but you have all these dead bodies in the yard. Kind of morbid, but I guess it gives the metaphor. And then if something else happened and you buried a body today, now that's going to be more something that you're conscious of, right? So you're going to suppress. You don't want anybody to know, so you're going to suppress, bury it, right? So we buried thoughts in the past in our yard that we did not feel comfortable with, that we felt separated. And then when new thoughts come up, we're actively engaged in thinking about it, that it's bad. So we're trying to push it down as well. We're not allowing the thought to come up. So we're repressing, we're suppressing, and then the next level is expressing. Okay? I'm not going to go into that right now. But the point I want to make is when these thoughts arise, all these thoughts are arising, what we want to do is to allow capacity for us to be able to deal with it. Okay? So when the thought arises, who creates the meaning on the thought? So if a thought comes up and you feel guilty about the thought and you feel it's a bad thought, who is actually creating that spin of good or bad? I mean, you could say it's society. However, that's not really true. Who creates the thinking good or bad started with you and started with me. So the I am, whoever I think I think that this is a bad thought and this is a good thought. So I want more of the good because they make me feel better. That's called seeking pleasure. I don't want a lot of the bad because they make me feel bad, and so I'm running from pain and suffering. So at the end of the day, these are all mind. These are all thoughts. And by my repressing the thoughts, I end up suppressing the thoughts, and then I repress the thoughts, and I end up with a backyard full of skeletons that are always in my energy field that somebody's going to find out that I have all these bad things in my energy. And that's what destroys our life. That's what is there every day, even though you're not thinking about it consciously, subconsciously, the energy is there that you know there's these thoughts rising all day long and you have to keep pushing them down. It drains our energy. It drains our energy. Sometimes when you resist, it persists. And then people start to act on these thoughts because there's so much energy that we've pushed down. It's like Jack in the Box. Eventually, when you line that thing up, it's going to pop. And then you have a problem, right? So this is what's happening on the planet with pretty much everybody because we all go through this process. So what we want to do is be able to heal this. Now I want to go back and talk briefly about karma because karma is a very powerful thing to understand. When I was younger, I didn't even know what it was. In my religious phases, I didn't know what it was. Today, it's really powerful, actually. Does anybody know what karma means? Type it in if you know. If you're watching on replay, you can type it in as well. Karma, what does that mean? If you're going to define karma, what does it mean? Anyone? Well, karma means action. So action. So if we really break this down, the universe is a physical, time, space. And action is movement. So movement is something that happens on everything that is in the universe. Everything is in movement, energy moving. So karma then is action. And it's not just a physical act, it could be a mental act. And even trying not to think about a bad thought is an action. So you're causing resistance, and when you push against it, you're actually creating more karma. So it's almost like a chain reaction. You have a thought arise, and you either push it back down, which is an action, or you could follow it. You know, if you follow the thought, you're taking action to follow the chain of thinking that will get you on this thought chain, and you're creating more action. So this is what happens. Now, in the yogic tradition, a lot of people talk about karma. And it's interesting because most people, if you ask them about karma, they want to get the good karma. So they want to go out and they want to do something, which again is action. When you're doing something, you're taking action and you're creating karma. Now, if you do a positive thing, here's my question. Who decides it's positive? You do. Some people would say it's negative, right? And it's all based on your perception because your brain is looking for meaning and you'll call it good. And it's probably good because you feel good. You get a chemical relation of something that makes you feel good. But anything that you do that's positive will also have negative with it because that's the law of duality. So keep in mind, even though it looks good now, it could cause a repercussion, a butterfly effect that causes negative things. We all know things that have happened that we thought were the worst case, and then it comes out really good for us. On the other side, we've done bad things, or really good things that come out bad. Bad things come out good. And that's because of the law of duality and polarity. So in the yogic tradition, a yogi is not trying to store up good karma and get a bunch of good karma. Because if you think about life, the more karma you're going to get into your life, the more actions create reactions. That means it has to fulfill itself. And that's where it gets very deep. We'll talk about this when we do the work together. But however, the negative creates also a karmic chain. So whether you do something good or bad, it's your brain that's labeling it. All we know is its action creates results. So let's not call it good or bad. Let's call it action and results. Make sense? As a yogi, the focus for the yogi is not to go do more good stuff. The focus of a true yogi is to realize that whether it's positive or negative, it's still karma. And we want to go to that place where there's no karma, which is neutralization or 0 point, where we become the observer, O for observer, not somebody trying to do good. Because when you're trying to do good, you're actually creating bad as well because they come together in polarity. If you're doing bad, well, there's going to be good with that too. The point is, there is going to be movement in the life cycle and the chain of thoughts that create action. So a yogi wants to just look at it and have choiceless awareness. Okay? So a yogi would look at it, we call it santosha. It gives me an example of a fan. I was up at the ashram and I was laying on the floor in Ocala and we were doing yoga nidra and I was meditating and I'm looking up, and as I got in this deep state of consciousness, I opened my eyes and I saw the ceiling fan because it was very hot and we had ceiling fans. And maybe you've ever looked up at one of those, right? And it was going really fast. And I started to blink my eyes and I noticed I could stop the wheel and see space in between where leaving my eyes open, I couldn't do that. And what was interesting is what came to me, because I was kind of in a meditative state, is that the ceiling fan represents the wheel of karma. And it's always moving. Now, here's what's interesting. It's moving because the choices we make and we get stuck in the cycle that many called Maya, the time-space continual expansion of movement that we recycle through. But the interesting thing I thought was if you turned off the energy to that fan, right? If you turned off the energy to the fan, there's no power to keep the wheel going. However, there is a time frame before it slows down. If you've ever seen that, it doesn't stop right when you turn off the energy. It continues until eventually it runs out of steam and then it stops. Karma's the same way. Whatever blades you pick, and I saw this too, on the blades you could choose good, and on the other side of good is another blade called bad, and it's going to come and get you. No matter what side you choose, you're going to get pounded because it's karma. Pain follows pleasure just as surely as pleasure follows pain. That is the life cycle. But in the middle there was a light and it wasn't moving. And I noticed that was the equilibrium point. That was the point of equanimity. There's no choice of good. There's no choice of bad. There's just the eye watching the movement on the screen of consciousness. The screen is who we are. What's going through the screen is not who we are, but who we think we are. And that is the identification with the body-mind complex. So what I realized is as we sit and watch what we do and take less and less action, less and less movement, we're going to create less karma. However, there is still a cycle that has to be played out because we've already started the chain reaction. So even if you stop now making choice after choice, there's still the chain that has to play itself out, just like turning off the ceiling fan. You still have a lot of rotations before it stops. So it's really powerful to know that phase one of this, all we have to do for phase one is to make friends with our shadow, to call it back home, to take the parts of ourself that we've fragmented off and to heal them by loving the parts of ourselves that we hate. The parts of ourselves that society says are bad, that our parents, that maybe you even believe that God says is bad. Once we really realize there is no bad and there is no good, those are just ideas of the mind, the meaning mind, and we understand there's just events that happen, action and results. And you get to see which action and result works better. However, a true yogi is saying, I don't want to choose either one. I just want to observe and allow it to move through. Because once that feeling moves through us, everything changes. But right now, a lot of us have our blockages in our body because we've repressed and suppressed our feelings from childhood, and they've created a dis-ease in the body. A disease is a blockage in the body that starts at the higher levels of consciousness, moves its way down into the gross body, and eventually it's nourished by our thinking and by not releasing, and then it starts to grow and manifest. And that's what we do. I cannot say do not. That's what we want to do is embrace and love these parts of ourselves, and then they'll start to move through, cleanse itself, create a lightness, create an ease. We'll move from dis-ease to ease because we'll understand that the shadow is just a feeling. We don't have to hang on to the thought, to the action of it. We can just feel the feeling in the body of the thought that we call negative and allow it to be just as it is. And once we feel it fully, it will start to release and remove, and our health will change, our life will change, our relationships will change. James says, I've never had feelings toward the same sex. However, I believe we are still battling issues with our childhood. Yep, I spent Christmas with my mother who treated me horribly and abused me verbally and all the time. Yeah, I see that. But being there in her presence made me realize that she had not learned anything in all these years and had not changed a bit. It's a sad fact, I guess, in my mind she had throughout the years, and you are right. I carry awful events that occurred in my past with her around daily without realizing it. But you are right. Part of me, the innocent child, is still driving me. Yeah, James, I get that. And that's why I think Gurudev used to say, if you think you're enlightened, you think you've done all this work on yourself, because a lot of people do think that they've reached this pinnacle. He said, go spend a weekend with your family and see if they can trigger you. And if they can, then definitely you still got work to do. And I think that's the big thing is those people, those people outside of us who have abused us or who have made us feel a certain way. The power comes when we actually realize that it's not them that's doing anything, because it's I'll give you an example of this. there was a lady at the ashram during one of the darshans, and she was having a big emotional issue because she was abused as a child. I think she is like 60 years old. And she was talking about, how do I get over this pain and molestation that I had when I was 5 years old by my father? And here's the power in that. Guru Dev said, you were molested by somebody else 55 years ago, but you're molesting yourself every day that you think about it. So when you want to release the pain, come back home to realize that it's your thinking about it, not it, that's causing the trauma. The it caused the trauma 55 years ago, and that was valid. Everything since then has been your mind, recycling, repeating, causing the trauma over and over and over. So what we need to do is go inside ourselves and ask, have I forgiven, truly forgiven? Because I don't think anybody would do what they've done if they knew who they were. I think even Jesus said, forgive them, for they know not what they do. They would have never crucified Jesus had they known who he was. And I think what he was saying is all of us are that. You know, we wouldn't do to each other what we do if we knew who we were doing it to and who we were. So it's the mind that blocks us from knowing. And so I think as we get forgiveness in ourselves, to love ourselves. And I think coming back home for me, for example, when I can just love that little Vince that actually was attracted to my friend, and it's not bad, and it's not a bad thing. It was a feeling I had. It was a pure feeling, and I expressed it the way I knew how, which was attempting to kiss. But that came off very bad, and that became a trauma in my life. So the work I have to do is to heal my mom by healing myself. I can heal myself by loving my mom and knowing that she didn't mean to do anything horribly. She meant to protect me based on her own philosophy, based on her programs. And I broke off a part of myself. Instead of loving me, I felt like nobody's going to accept me. And the most important part is that I accept me. Nobody else has to accept me. The entire world can walk out of my life. And that will not matter as long as I accept me. And I know who I am. And if you know who you are and you accept you and you love you, then the whole world can walk out and it will be okay. However, that's not going to happen. What's going to happen is as we love ourselves, a lot of people are going to start walking in because we become a representation of that love that they also resonate with. And we also can accept others on a grander scale because we've accepted that part of our shadow that we've broken off and we're bringing it home. That little boy that was kissing his friend is being brought home. He's not hated. He's not separated. He's loved because he's special. And he deserves tremendous love because all he was doing is expressing his heart. So that is the power. And this is just a little short example of what we're going to dive into with Shadow2Strength. I'm building this course. It's going to be amazing. So for those of you that feel like this resonates with you, if you're watching this, drop a comment below. Let me know that it's of interest to you to go deeper into your shadow, to heal, so you have more light in your day, more light in your business, more light in this world that needs more light. And I'm continuing this journey because the only way for me to heal is to immerse myself, to teach others. And the more I'm teaching, the more I'm healing me, the more people around me will heal as well. And that's, I think, our call is to heal ourselves. So I appreciate you. Thank you for watching. Thank you, James. Thank you for everybody that's watching on replay. Drop a note below. Let me know what you think. Give me your biggest takeaway from the session. And I look forward to seeing you on another event. And I'll be doing more of these. So many blessings to you. Have a beautiful night. And remember to love yourself, because the shadow part of you is just as valid as the light part. It takes both of them to make the wholeness. So let's bring home the shadow and let's learn to love ourselves. And the world will start to bring more light into this new earth that we're going to build. Have a great night, guys. Beautiful.